A lavish wedding hall shines with chandeliers and whispers of status. In the middle of the celebration, a shocking insult cuts the air when a black woman is denied a seat in front of everyone. While arrogance fuels the antagonist, the woman's silent dignity unsettles the room. One symbolic action and one powerful line change the atmosphere before a cliffhanger hints at her deeper connection to the groom. "We don't seat people like you at the front." The words struck the hall like broken glass scattering across marble floors. Conversations froze, silver cutlery stilled midair, and a few nervous chuckles died in throats. It wasn't said in whispers, it was spat, loud enough for chandeliers to tremble above and every eye in the wedding hall to turn out the grand sapphire. Ballroom gleamed with white roses and golden drapes, the kind of place that carried money in its air. Long tables stretched with crystal glasses, champagne flowing like silk, and a choir softly echoing hymns at the edges of the room. Everyone was dressed in whites, creams, and silvers, as if color itself had been politely denied entry. And at the center of it all stood Marcia, a black woman in a simple navy blue dress that looked both too modest and too powerful for this polished cruelty. She had only stepped forward, invitation in hand, when the words from the wedding planner, a sharp-faced woman with pearl earrings cut her dignity in half. "You can sit in the back," the planner sneered, lifting her clipboard like a shield. "Guests of your type don't sit with family." The arrogance was sharp, dripping with the kind of entitlement that believes chandeliers existed only for certain skin. Gasps fluttered across the hall. A few people turned away, pretending not to hear, but their silence was its own applause for the insult. Marcia did not move. She did not stammer, did not cry. Instead, her stillness unsettled them more than any outburst could. She set the invitation on the nearest table, its edges trembling under the soft draft of the air conditioning, and slowly adjusted the strap of her dress on her shoulder, deliberate, graceful. The symbolic action was small, almost nothing. She reached down and picked up a chair that had been left slightly out of place near the wall. With calm precision, she carried it forward across the marble, the sound of its legs scraping echoing louder than the orchestra. She placed it not in the back, not to the side, but directly at the family table, where the groom's chair was still empty. Gasps deepened. Whispers ran like wildfire. The planner's face burned crimson. "Excuse me? Did you not hear me? You don't belong here." Marcia finally raised her eyes. Her voice was low, steady, but each word struck like a bell tolling through the hall. "I belong wherever truth remembers me." The words cracked the air. For the first time, people shifted uneasily in their seats. The arrogance of the planner faltered. Her mouth opened, but no words came, and then from the far end of the aisle came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. The groom himself was approaching, his eyes locked not on the planner, not on the guests, but on Marcia. Every head turned as his shadow stretched across the marble. His lips curved not in confusion, not in anger, but in something dangerously close to reverence. The hall held its breath. The groom stopped just short of Marcia's chair, and the room knew something was about to break. The groom approaches Marcia, creating tension as whispers ripple through the hall. Guests are stunned by the unexpected attention he gives her. The chapter focuses on his deliberate actions, the shift in power, and Marcia's quiet composure that slowly unsettles the arrogant wedding staff. A subtle hint emerges that the groom knows more about her than anyone realizes. The groom stopped just short of Marcia's chair. A ripple ran through the room, like a silent warning passing from guest to guest. Every face held the same question: who is she to command this much attention? He was tall, impeccable in a crisp white tuxedo that seemed designed to command the spotlight. Yet as he bent slightly, offering a hand toward Marcia, there was no arrogance in his posture, only a calm authority that spoke louder than entitlement ever could. Marcia looked at him, her eyes steady, measuring the space between them. She did not reach for his hand immediately, waiting as though her acceptance would seal the moment like a quiet verdict. "Marcia," he said softly, the name rolling from his lips with weight. "I asked for you at the front." Shock rippled across the hall. The planner's hand froze mid-air, guests murmured, and even the choir's notes seemed to falter. No one had expected the groom himself to speak against the invisible rules that governed the event. The arrogance of those around him began to crumble subtly. A few wealthy relatives exchanged worried glances. Whispers replaced laughter. The air was thick with disbelief and the silent terror of disrupted social order. Marcia finally moved, placing her hand in his. The touch was brief, formal, yet carried the kind of gravity that pulled attention toward them like gravity itself. The groom's eyes flicked toward the staff, and in that gaze, there was a warning. Do not underestimate her. He turned back to her, leading her gently to the seat at the family table. Guests parted instinctively, a path forming as if the room itself acknowledged her right to sit there. Each step she took echoed her silent defiance, her calm dignity striking harder than any words could. The planner sputtered, "But that's impossible." "She's not. She's here," the groom said evenly, cutting her off. "And she sits where she belongs." Marcia settled into the chair, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Every subtle movement crossing her legs, adjusting the napkin on her lap, was a quiet assertion of her presence. Whispers spread further. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly, capturing each micro-expression, the astonishment of the guests, the faltering of the planner, the pride flashing subtly in the groom's eyes. It was a silent rebellion, yet it spoke louder than any argument could. And in that moment, Marcia's inner monologue revealed a hidden truth, one that made her calm composure more than just pride. She was not here merely as a guest. She had a connection, a bond with the groom that no one else knew, one that would soon shift the balance of power in the room completely. The music resumed, yet it felt hollow, as if the hall itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Someone at the back of the hall whispered a name, one that hinted at Marcia's hidden influence and hinted that the fades and lasso hinted that the groom's choice was just the beginning of the upheaval. The hall buzzes, with whispers and speculation about Marcia's identity and connection to the groom. Guests struggle to hide their shock while Marcia remains composed, silently asserting her presence. The wedding staff begins to panic, realizing their authority is slipping. Subtle clues hint at her influence and the growing tension between dignity and arrogance. Whispers snake through the hall like a slow, dangerous river. "Who is she? Why is the groom? He can't." Voices collided, soft yet sharp enough to carry tension to every corner of the room. Marcia remained still, her eyes focused on the groom as he chatted briefly with a few family members. Every glance she received, she met with unwavering calm. Her presence was magnetic, drawing attention not through flamboyance, but through the quiet power of confidence. The planner's face had turned a sickly shade of pink, beads of sweat forming at her temple. She clutched her clipboard as though it were a shield against the chaos unfolding in front of her. The rules she thought were unbreakable were crumbling before her eyes. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats. Some dared to glance toward Marcia's chair repeatedly, unable to reconcile the woman's simple elegance with the shock of her being seated at the head table. The contrast was jarring, the polished wealth of the room against the understated strength of her calm demeanor. A relative leaned over to another, whispering harshly, "Doesn't she know anyone here?" "Apparently not," the other replied, eyes wide. "Or maybe she knows the right person." Marcia's mind, however, was elsewhere. Every look, every murmur, was a part of the larger observation she had been quietly conducting since her arrival. She noted each faltering smile, each nervous posture. This was more than a wedding. It was a stage, and she had entered as the pivot on which the scene would turn. The groom returned, standing beside her chair, and whispered softly, "Ignore them. Sit, smile, let them stew." His words were simple, yet they carried layers of authority and unspoken history. Marcia nodded subtly, letting her calm radiate outward. The guests, unaware of their own discomfort, couldn't help but notice the way she occupied space without demanding it. It was almost cruel in its quiet effectiveness. Meanwhile, the planner scrambled behind the scenes, pulling staff aside and whispering orders that no one seemed capable of executing. Each instruction was met with hesitation, a silent rebellion in the form of subtle delays and stifled sighs. The whispers grew louder as the photographer adjusted his lens, catching every detail. The way Marcia's hand rested lightly on the table, the serene determination in her eyes, the groom's protective proximity. These images would tell a story far beyond what words could capture. But the room had yet to realize it. Marcia's glance briefly met the back of the hall where a woman in a lavish gown whispered a name, one that carried weight in certain circles. The recognition in her eyes was fleeting but powerful. The presence of hidden influence was now palpable, though no one else fully understood why tension gripped the hall like a living thing. The music played on, yet its warmth felt artificial. Every note carried the weight of expectation and scrutiny. Every eye that dared linger on Marcia's calm defiance seemed to shrink under the unspoken truth. Power is not always loud, and dignity can dismantle arrogance without a single shout. A guest at the far end of the hall rises abruptly, murmuring a question that could expose Marcia's hidden role, forcing everyone to confront the reality behind the groom's unusual behavior. A guest publicly questions Marcia's presence at the wedding, challenging her authority and stirring tension. The room reacts with shock, and the arrogance of some guests is exposed. Marcia maintains her calm composure, while the groom subtly asserts his protection. The chapter highlights the growing power struggle and hints at secrets connecting her to the groom. A man near the back, tall and sharply dressed, leaned forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Excuse me. Who is she exactly?" The words landed like a hammer on fragile glass. Conversation ceased mid-word. The waiter holding a tray froze, champagne trembling in glasses. All eyes swung toward the voice, then to Marcia, who sat poised, serene, unflinching. The groom's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained calm, measured. He moved a fraction closer to Marcia, as if creating an invisible shield around her. The subtle gesture was enough to silence most of the hall. Those who had assumed the seat denial was justified now hesitated. Realizing the balance of authority had shifted, Marcia slowly lifted her gaze to meet the man's, her eyes sharp yet composed. The moment was electric, charged with unspoken warnings. "I am here because truth and loyalty recognize each other," she said evenly, each word deliberate. "Everything else is irrelevant." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some gasped softly, some whispered in confusion, and others stiffened, recognizing the quiet power in her words. The questioner's confidence faltered. The arrogance he had carried like armor seemed suddenly thin and fragile. The groom's hand rested lightly on the back of her chair. It was a subtle claim of connection, a reminder to the room that Marcia was not just any guest. She was under his watch, and his watch carried authority beyond the planner, beyond the wealthy relatives, beyond the whispers of social convention. The planner's lips twitched, a silent scream trapped behind perfect decorum. Every attempt she made to regain control, to command compliance from the staff, failed. Her authority had become performative, visible but powerless. Marcia's eyes swept across the hall, noting the subtle shifts, the raised eyebrows of the matriarchs, the stiff posture of the uncles, the quiet astonishment of the bridesmaids. Each movement, each glance, was a testament to the disruption she had caused without lifting her voice in anger. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, Marcia's mind raced with calculation. Every reaction, every word, every subtle gesture was part of a larger strategy. The groom's presence made it possible, his protection making her quiet rebellion safe. But the consequences for those who underestimated her would be felt soon. The tall man swallowed, his mouth opening again, but the words refused to come. The room hung on the precipice, waiting for the next move, anticipation thick as fog. Marcia's hand brushed lightly against the table, a simple, mundane gesture made monumental by her composure. The room noticed. Every whispered insult, every subtle attempt at undermining her, had been absorbed and transformed into an aura of quiet power. A maid tripped slightly near the buffet, spilling water that caught in the soft light. A small yet symbolic ripple of disruption mirroring the larger disturbance Marcia had caused in the social hierarchy of the cuts in the social hierarchy of its disruption mirroring the larger disturbance Marcia had caused in the social hierarchy of the peace and the social hierarchy of the room. The music played on, but its cheerful notes felt hollow against the tension that now hung in the hall. Guests could sense the invisible shift in power. The arrogance they had relied upon was beginning to crack under the weight of dignity and truth. The groom leans in to whisper something to Marcia, words that hint at secrets that could shock the entire wedding and reveal why her presence is more than just unexpected. The groom leaned close, his voice barely audible over the soft hum of the orchestra. "Sit still. They will learn soon enough," he whispered, his eyes scanning the hall. Marcia nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. The words confirmed what she had suspected all along. Her presence was no accident, and the groom's deliberate choice was more than social defiance, it was personal. Every subtle glance they exchanged carried weight. To the outside eye, it seemed a simple reassurance, but the truth was layered with years of history, loyalty, and promises kept in the shadows. The power she now held in the room was not just courtesy, it was earned through knowledge, patience, and the quiet accumulation of respect and influence. The guests, meanwhile, continued to whisper, unaware that the groom's attention was not spontaneous but strategic. They speculated wildly about her identity: a distant cousin? An old friend? Some mysterious benefactor? Each guess only heightened their discomfort, their uncertainty feeding the slow unraveling of their arrogance. Marcia's calm was a weapon. She adjusted the napkin on her lap with deliberate care, her posture impeccable, her gaze unwavering. Every detail, from the tilt of her head to the slight cross of her legs, broadcast quiet authority. Those who tried to dismiss her presence found themselves captivated against their will. The planner paced behind the table, her clipboard useless, her authority evaporating with each passing second. She tried to intervene subtly, leaning toward a server to whisper directions, but the staff hesitated. Even small acts of compliance felt heavy under the weight of Marcia's calm and the groom's subtle insistence. Marcia's mind drifted briefly to the past, remembering a promise made long ago. The memory was sharp, precise, and illuminating. It was a reminder of why she was here and why this confrontation, this silent challenge to social hierarchy, mattered. She had been waiting for the right moment, and the groom's presence now made it possible. The music swelled as if sensing the shift. A violin's note lingered longer than intended, and the subtle discord mirrored the tension threading through the hall. Guests felt it instinctively. The invisible boundaries they relied upon were bending, reshaping around a new center. Marcia herself. She caught sight of the tall man from earlier. His earlier question now stuck in his throat. His confident posture had softened, his whispers replaced by a nervous fidget. Authority was fragile, Marcia reflected, and arrogance could crumble under quiet dignity. The groom touched her shoulder lightly, a small but deliberate reminder that he was present, that she was protected, and that her position was intentional, not accidental. His hand carried reassurance and strategy simultaneously. A guest at the far end of the hall muttered something about etiquette and decorum, but even their words felt diminished against the gravity of the unfolding truth. Every subtle gesture Marcia made now seemed amplified, each minor movement reverberating through the room with undeniable consequence. As the first toast is announced, eyes turned toward Marcia once more, and the guests began to realize that her connection to the groom might hold far more significance than anyone had guessed. A sad hush fell over the hall as the master of ceremonies announced, "Please, a toast from the groom." The groom stood, tall and composed, his gaze sweeping across the room. Champagne flute in hand, he walked deliberately toward the head of the table, stopping just before Marcia's chair. Every eye followed, and the whispers grew more frantic, unable to contain the shock of what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, commanding, "today we celebrate love, family, and truth." His glance landed on Marcia, lingering just long enough to draw attention without breaking decorum. The room stiffened, sensing the weight behind the words. Some of you may wonder why certain decisions are made, why certain seats are assigned. But the truth, he continued, turning to the gathered crowd, is that respect, loyalty, and dignity deserve acknowledgement wherever they appear. Heads turned toward Marcia. Gasps escaped softly. Some whispered hurried questions. The arrogance of the guests, The unquestioned hierarchy they had relied upon began to crumble under the clarity of his words. Marcia remained still, her hands resting lightly on the table, her composure unshaken. She had anticipated this moment, the public acknowledgement that would finally draw every eye toward the truth. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing discomfort of those around her. The groom lifted her hand gently, bringing it to his lips. A soft kiss, deliberate and reverent, yet performed publicly enough to ensure everyone saw. The act carried weight far beyond a simple gesture. It was recognition, respect, and subtle defiance all at once. Whispers erupted throughout the hall. Some guests gasped audibly, others turned pale, and a few simply froze, unable to reconcile what they had just witnessed. The planner's face flushed crimson, her authority shattered in the silence that followed. Marcia's mind remained focused, observing the reactions with keen precision. Every gasp, every faltering smile, every whispered comment was a note in the symphony of subtle power dynamics playing out before her. She had become the pivot on which the social hierarchy tilted. The groom returned her hand to the table, his eyes meeting hers with an unspoken understanding. The room, now charged with tension, seemed to acknowledge her position without a single word spoken directly to them. Even the musicians sensed the shift. The soft strains of the string quartet took on a heightened poignancy, their melodies underscoring the quiet rebellion unfolding in real time. Each note seemed to echo the invisible message: dignity can dismantle arrogance without confrontation. A distant relative whispered sharply, "Who is she, really?" Their voice tinged with both fear and awe. The question hung in the air, unanswered, yet fully acknowledged by everyone present. The groom's gaze remained steady, unwavering, and Marcia responded with the same calm authority. The toast was more than celebration. It was declaration, affirmation, and quiet revolution. As the applause begins to rise, a figure in the back of the hall steps forward, eyes fixed on Marcia, hinting that the unfolding events are far from over. The tall man who had questioned Marcia earlier now stepped forward, his steps deliberate and sharp against the marble floor. The room stiffened, sensing confrontation. Guests whispered urgently, aware that the tension had reached a new peak. "Do you think you belong here?" he demanded, voice slightly raised, trying to mask uncertainty with bravado. "This is a family celebration, not whatever this is." Marcia turned her head slowly, eyes locking onto his with a steady, unflinching gaze. Her voice was soft, calm, but every word carried authority. "I belong wherever dignity is recognized. You are merely learning that lesson now." The man's face flushed and a tremor ran through his posture. He had relied on entitlement, on assumed social order, but Marcia's composed presence exposed the fragility of his arrogance. The groom remained by her side, subtle yet unmistakable in support, a hand lightly on the back of her chair, a slight tilt of his stance toward the aggressor, all silent signals of protection and authority. The room felt the invisible boundaries shift, like tectonic plates moving beneath the veneer of etiquette. Guests murmured, unsure whether to intervene, retreat, or watch. The room was filled with an almost tangible tension, a quiet storm that made even the chandeliers seem to shiver above. Marcia's calm was deliberate, a weapon sharper than any raised voice. Her hand rested lightly on the table, fingers tracing the edge of the crystal surface, grounding herself in serenity while projecting strength. Every subtle gesture made the man falter, revealing cracks in his confidence he hadn't known existed. "You've misjudged this gathering," she continued, her words slicing cleanly through the arrogance that clung to him like armor. "It is not about who you think belongs. It is about truth and respect." The tall man's lips quivered. He opened his mouth again but could not find words that carried the weight to counter her composure. The room's silence amplified the moment, every heartbeat echoing against the grandeur of the hall. The planner, desperate to regain control, stepped forward, but the groom's quiet glance halted her. Her influence had dissolved. Authority had shifted, and she realized too late that she was merely a spectator to the unfolding reversal of power. Marcia's inner monologue reflected the subtle thrill of the moment. Years of preparation, patience, and observation had brought her to this apex. She had faced countless moments where dignity was challenged, but never had a single moment carried such visible impact. The tall man backed off slightly, his gaze unwillingly admiring yet begrudgingly fearful. The lesson was clear. Arrogance could not withstand composure, and entitlement could crumble in the face of unshakable calm. The whispers of the crowd grew, now tinged with awe and disbelief. The air was heavy with the realization that a quiet force could dismantle long-held hierarchies without overt confrontation. As the tension peaks, a hush falls over the hall. Someone whispers a name from Marcia's past, hinting at secrets that could alter perceptions of everyone present. A hush fell over the hall. Someone in the back, eyes wide, whispered a name, one that carried weight in circles few in attendance had ever encountered. It was a name that resonated with history, influence, and quiet authority. Marcia's gaze shifted briefly, acknowledging the recognition with a faint, knowing smile. She had anticipated this moment, the delicate unveiling of her identity and the subtle disruption it would cause. The guests, unaware of the deeper connection, felt a ripple of unease pass through the room. The groom's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a signal both of protection and affirmation. Every subtle gesture reinforced her presence and authority, sending a silent message. This is her space, her moment, and her recognition is deserved. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that?" one guest murmured, disbelief shaking her voice. "She's related to him?" The realization struck slowly, like dominoes tipping over one by one. The arrogance and entitlement of those around Marcia began to crack under the pressure of unexpected truths. Guests who had assumed superiority now struggled to mask astonishment, discomfort, and in some cases fear. Marcia's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the flustered chaos surrounding her. She adjusted her posture ever so slightly, crossing her legs gracefully, allowing the subtle shift in body language to emphasize her composed authority. Every movement, though minimal, broadcast quiet power. The tall man from earlier, still recovering from his failed confrontation, whispered under his breath, unable to comprehend how someone so understated could wield such influence. His arrogance had met its match not in aggression, but in dignity, history, and silent command. The planner clutched her clipboard, lips pressed tightly, realizing her previous attempts to dictate the scene were now meaningless. The rules she thought inviolable had been rewritten by presence and truth, a reality that unsettled her to the core. Marcia's eyes swept across the room, noting each subtle reaction, raised eyebrows, held breaths, and the slow acknowledgement that social hierarchies could be undone with quiet, composure, and unwavering confidence. The groom leaned in slightly, whispering once more, "You've always belonged here." They just didn't see it yet. Her lips curved into a small, private smile. Every element of the unfolding moment, the recognition, the subtle shock, the invisible power was validation of years spent cultivating patience, awareness, and quiet authority. The music continued softly, but the atmosphere had transformed. The hall, previously buzzing with entitlement and assumption, now vibrated with uncertainty. The guests had begun to understand that Marcia's presence was no accident, that the groom's choice was deliberate, and that dignity could wield influence stronger than arrogance. A distant cousin muttered, almost inaudibly, "I never expected her." The room's energy shifted, a subtle but undeniable force now centering on Marcia. Her calm composure had become the fulcrum upon which the entire social balance teetered. As the wedding toast concludes, a photographer discreetly snaps a photo, capturing a fleeting glance between Marcia and the groom, hinting that the coming moments will fully expose her significance and the truth behind her presence. The room buzzed with tension as the final toast ended, but the groom's gaze never left Marcia. He stepped forward, raising his glass once more, but this time his eyes scanned the hall deliberately, fixing on those who had whispered, judged, and underestimated. "Today," he began, voice firm, resonant, and impossible to ignore, "is about love, respect, and recognizing those who hold dignity in their hearts." The guests leaned forward instinctively, some curious, others apprehensive. Whispers surged, questions forming on trembling lips. But the groom held the room's attention with unwavering authority. Then, in a deliberate cinematic gesture, he extended his hand toward Marcia, lifting her hand gently and bringing it to his lips in a public, unmistakable act of respect and honor. The hall fell silent. The clinking of glasses paused mid-motion. The cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment that would ripple through memories, conversations, and social media alike. Gasps echoed across the room. Some guests looked around, seeking validation, but none came. The arrogance they had relied on, the hierarchy they assumed, had been appended in one graceful, powerful gesture. Marcia remained seated, calm, her hand resting lightly in his. The simplicity of her posture belied the power of the moment. She did not smile widely, did not gasp. She merely allowed the act to speak volumes, letting the silent dignity radiate across the room. A wealthy aunt clutched her pearls, her face pale. A distant cousin whispered hurriedly, "I never imagined." The planner's lips trembled, her clipboard forgotten. She had tried to maintain control, enforce rules, and preserve the assumed order, but it was gone. Every attempt at authority had been swept aside by elegance, calm, and deliberate choice. The groom turned slightly toward the audience, eyes flicking across faces now tinged with awe, discomfort, and disbelief. "This woman," he continued, voice steady, represents what many of us overlook: courage, patience, and the strength to stand tall in the face of prejudice. Let this be a lesson to all who judge by appearance or status." A wave of murmurs passed through the hall. Some tried to speak, but their words faltered against the weight of undeniable truth. The arrogance that had once defined the room now seemed fragile, laughably inadequate in contrast to quiet dignity and deliberate recognition. Marcia's inner thoughts remained calm. Each reaction, every subtle glance, was a confirmation of what she had always known. True power is not loud. It is unshakable, and it commands respect without seeking it. She noticed a young bridesmaid, wide-eyed, staring in awe. A subtle smile flickered across Marcia's face. The child's gaze carried unspoken admiration, recognizing authenticity over entitlement. The groom finally released her hand, allowing her to settle back comfortably in her chair. He leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for being patient. Your moment has arrived." The room exhaled collectively, a mixture of relief, confusion, and grudging admiration. Some guests whispered apologies to themselves, others avoided her gaze, unable to confront the truth of their assumptions. Even the tall man from earlier had no words. His posture sagged, his previously assumed authority crumbling. He realized that no argument, no question, could undo the public recognition. The undeniable respect displayed before everyone. The music resumed, softly, gently, but its tone had changed. The hall now hummed with the reverberation of a lesson learned. A hierarchy shifted and dignity acknowledged. Marcia glanced at the groom once more. Her calm smile, subtle but piercing in impact, mirrored the room's transformation. Social arrogance had been dismantled quietly, effectively, and irrevocably. The photographer captured the final image, the groom kneeling ever so slightly, kissing her hand before all witnesses. A single frame that told the story of resilience, quiet power, and the collapse of entitlement. In that moment, the hall understood, fully. The woman once denied a seat had become the fulcrum of change, exposing arrogance and entitlement with a single composed presence and the groom's deliberate acknowledgement. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then swelling, carrying the echoes of admiration, shock, and respect. Marcia's calm authority had rewritten the narrative. Every whispered insult, every social assumption, every ounce of arrogance had been quietly dismantled. As the applause reverberates, Marcia's eyes meet someone in the far corner, hinting that the final resolution is near, and that the story's full truth is about to unfold in the closing chapter. The applause continued, filling the hall with a mixture of awe and reluctant admiration. Guests who had whispered, judged, or underestimated Marcia now found themselves confronted with the undeniable truth. Her presence, her dignity, and her quiet power had transformed the social dynamic completely. The groom stepped aside slightly, allowing Marcia to rise if she wished. She remained seated, calm, allowing the moment to speak for itself. Her gaze swept across the room, noting every subtle shift in posture, every faltering glance, every whispered realization. The arrogance that had once dominated the hall had been replaced with acknowledgement, respect, and quiet admiration. The tall man who had challenged her earlier approached, hesitance etched into his movements. I apologize, he said, voice subdued. I misjudged you. Marcia met his gaze, eyes steady, and nodded slightly. Understanding comes with humility, she replied. The words were soft, but carried the authority of experience and patience. Even the planner, flushed and anxious, realized that her efforts to enforce the invisible hierarchy had been futile. She straightened, attempting decorum, but the lesson had been delivered. Authority founded on prejudice and arrogance was no match for calm dignity and rightful recognition. The groom returned, his hand brushing lightly against Marcia's in a gesture of support and acknowledgement. You've shown them, he whispered. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through presence, through truth. Marcia's lips curved into a small private smile. Her journey, marked by patience, observation, and quiet defiance, had reached its peak. She had transformed the energy of the room without raising her voice or compromising her calm. Every insult, every whisper, every attempted slight had been absorbed and transformed into undeniable authority. Guests began to approach cautiously, offering congratulations, apologies, and curious questions. Each interaction was met with composure, each acknowledgement received without arrogance or condescension. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone sensed it subtly, but permanently. The groom raised his glass one final time, this time not just for the toast, but as a silent acknowledgement of Marcia's triumph. To truth, he said, voice carrying through the hall. To dignity. And to those who understand both. The crowd raised their glasses, some with genuine admiration, others with tentative acceptance. The sound of clinking crystal filled the space, underscoring the transformation that had taken place. Marcia allowed herself a moment to breathe fully, taking in the room that had initially sought to undermine her. Every glance now spoke recognition, every whispered word carried respect, and every subtle gesture acknowledged her presence. Social hierarchies, once rigid and unyielding, had been quietly dismantled. The young bridesmaid from earlier approached, shyly holding a bouquet. You were amazing, she whispered. Marcia smiled gently, reaching down to touch her hand lightly. Remember, she said softly, quiet strength can change the world more than loud words ever will. Even the tall man watched from a distance, his previous arrogance replaced with reflection. He understood now that presence, patience, and integrity held power far greater than entitlement. The groom leaned close, whispering, "This is just the beginning. The truth you carry will leave a mark." Marcia's eyes met his, calm and resolute. The story of denial, arrogance, and quiet triumph had reached its conclusion, but the lessons would linger, echoing long after the chandeliers dimmed and the guests departed. The wedding hall, once a stage for entitlement, had become a testament to dignity, respect, and poetic justice. Every element, the gestures, the whispers, the public acknowledgement had converged to redefine power, honor, and social balance. As the final photographs were taken, capturing the groom gently holding her hand and the room's collective awe, Marcia's calm authority radiated fully. She had turned a moment of insult into a demonstration of quiet revolution, leaving everyone present with a lesson etched into memory. The music played softly, fading into a gentle hum, while Marcia and the groom shared a brief glance that encapsulated years of loyalty, patience, and respect. The applause lingered, hearts shifted, and the room once dominated by arrogance bowed, however subtly, to dignity and truth. And with that, the chapter closed not with triumph shouted, but with justice quietly, irrevocably felt.